Hi everyone, it's Alex. Welcome back to Artificer Studios. This is the first video that is coming to you from my new workshop and my new house. Once it's fully cleaned up again, I will give you guys a little tour of my mini workspace down here. But today I'm going to be going over some of the tools that I think are essential in a beginning jewelry kit. I have laid out here on my table a basic assortment of tools that I see as crucial for a beginning jewelry toolkit. Some of these are going to be variations of things that you might see in other people's lists, and some of them are going to be things you don't see on a list whatsoever. But this is what I see as, from the way I learned, to be either crucial tools or tools that will help you a lot quicker when you're starting to do certain stuff. So I'm going to run through every single one of these and explain what they are and why they are a good thing to have. So the starting point I'm going to have for here as an absolute you must have this to be able to do the jewelry work is going to be your saw frame. There are going to be many different types of manufacturers for the saw frames. There are going to be many different sizes for the saw frames. Pretty much all of them will be adjustable so that you can change the neck size dependent on if you're trying to use a shorter saw blade or whatever. But the crucial part for you to begin with is going to be the depth here. This one specifically is a 5-inch saw frame, and this is the size I started with. A large portion of the stuff that I do nowadays, I do with this one, which you can see is only a 3-inch, so it's much smaller. Where the size will come into play is by having the longer neck here. It will make it so that you can cut further into a sheet of metal before you have to try and bend it or go from another direction. I have another one of these that's a full 9 inches, so that I can work on much larger pieces of metal. But this 5-inch is a good starting base for a saw frame. Going right along with the saw frame is you need to have saw blades. I have a test tube rack that I keep mine in, but when you buy your saw blades, they will come in these little bundles, usually in an envelope, and there will be a certain number of these little bundles in the envelope. Each one of these is 12 blades. I tend to prefer using the 00 blades, but 00 or 0 will cover you for most thicknesses of metal for anything that you're going to be cutting. But in my basic piercing video, I believe I cover how to determine the size of blade that you want to use. But the 00 seems to be primarily what I will use for almost everything. The other absolute you must have is some form of a bench pin. This is going to be what you actually rest the metal on. Most of them are some form of wooden board with some form of a clamp to be able to attach it to a table. You can make your own out of a 1-inch piece of pine wood, and you can cut it to however you want, and you can put it onto your table with a C-clamp. You can get very simple with them. This tends to be the one that I prefer, simply because it has the anvil surface right on it for me to be able to do riveting or any basic texturing, anything like that. It just eliminates the need for another tool by having this steel plate on it. And this specifically is that other tool. On one side you've got a nice smooth metal surface. The other side on this one is dished in. If you get one of these, I would suggest doing this one so that you can use it for multiple purposes. But it's a 4-inch steel block. Again, you use it for riveting or texturing, or if you want to do anything specific, like sometimes you might have to flatten your metal, and this is what you'll want to do that with. But then this will allow you to dish it if you want to do a nice pendant. Instead of it being flat, you can dish it out. But again, if you're just using it as a flat piece, having the metal base on the bench pin makes it so that you don't have to have an additional tool in your box. This is a ring mandrel. You use it when making rings, obviously. It is numbered, starting at the top at 1 and going down to 15. And that corresponds to the size of the ring. The dashes in between are obviously for quarter, halves, and 3/4 of sizes. But this can be used, you can wrap wire around it to make jump rings. You can wrap the actual band of a ring around it. But they are very handy to have. You can replicate them using just different sizes of wooden dowels. But it's always smart to have one of these on hand, because now you can actually hammer directly on it. This is a ring vise or ring clamp. On either end, it's got leather pads inside the jaws. One end is squared off, the other end is rounded. And the purpose of this is so that you can clamp, intended for rings, but you can use it for almost any small piece of metal work. You can set it in the jaw, and then you take the wedge and put it on the other end, and it holds it nice and firm so that it's easier for you to either hold this or brace it against your pen, instead of just holding your piece in your hand, because your hand will get tired trying to hold that piece of metal there for a long time. So these are always handy to have. They make them in plastic, they make them in metal, they make them in wood. The wood is just simple. This is called a B&S gauge or a wire gauge. And the numbers going around the side with the different gaps in it correspond to the thickness of the metal. So it's always handy to have one of these so you know how thick the metal you're working on is. That can help you determine what size saw blade to use. You can use it to determine what size drill bit you need if you're going to be setting rivets, all sorts of stuff. It's always handy to have something like that. You can also just do it with a ruler and measure things. This one actually has a gauge built right into it. So if you can find a machinist's ruler like this, it could be useful. But the wire gauge and some form of a 6-inch steel machinist's ruler are the two measuring devices you're going to want to have in a beginning jewelry kit. There are a few different types of files you'll want to use or have. You'll want to have some form of a larger file. These are two examples. One is a half round and one is a square file. But you want something that generally, I believe it is considered a 00 tooth on this size of a file. And it will help you smooth out your cuts, make it a little bit nicer, and make it easier and less work for when you switch to the smaller files, which are generally considered needle files. And they come in a variety of different shapes. You can usually get them as a little pack, and they'll come with 7 to 12, sometimes more, depending on how detailed you want to get in them. You don't need diamond files or anything like that, just a simple set of needle files. But they will come in square, round, flat, half round, diamond, all sorts of different shapes to make it fit for anything that you are trying to file. I have 3 different hammers up here. 2 of them I use as riveting hammers. The other one is called a chasing hammer. So this one is the chasing hammer. It's got a little bit larger handle on the back of it because this is intended for you to be holding it for a long period of time. With chasing, you're usually sitting here and doing this for a very long time. So you want something that will be a little bit more comfortable in your hand than something nice and thin like this. A lot of times in your beginning days, you will use it for texturing the metal, or with this one being slightly curved, you can use this in your steel block to dish out your metal and texture it that way. The main thing I like using them for is the ball end, the peen on the back side of it. I clamp it into my table clamp like that. and I use that to rivet on, especially when I'm doing tube rivets. That helps. But the thing that I generally do is I just have a spare head that I clamp in, so I don't have to have the full handle. Because most of the time I'm not going to be using this if I'm traveling or anything. But for beginning, it's nice to have one. These two hammers, I use both as riveting, but technically speaking, this is usually considered a riveting hammer, and this one is considered a planishing hammer. The riveting hammer will have a flat side, and it will have a straight peen side. And it's so that with the straight peen, you can kind of flare the rivet head out a little bit more. It will speed up the process a little, and then the flat side you can use to smooth everything out. With the planishing hammer, the small planishing, you've got a flat end and a slightly domed end. I prefer using this one with riveting simply because with the slightly domed end paired with my spare peen hammerhead, I can hit very precisely when I'm doing the rivets. But that is a personal preference, so it's up to you to decide what kind of hammer you want to use. You can buy them individually, you can buy them in a kit, but you have to kind of figure out what your preferred style is. I have two types of center punches or scribes here. Again, this is going to be a personal preference what you want to use. This one is a simple pressure activated center punch that you can find at pretty much any hardware store. You push down on it against the piece of metal, and there's a spring inside of it, and it will jab into the metal and give you a hole to be able to start your drilling. This one is just a simple machinist's scribe or center punch that you have to use something to tap on the end of it to leave your hole. This one can be nicer to use opposed to the mechanical center punch simply because it doubles as a scribe, so you can now use this on your metal against your ruler to scribe lines, mark on it, anything like that. So it's a little bit more versatile because it's got a nicer point on it. I earlier briefly mentioned on the bench vise or the table vise, it is just a mini vise. It's got a small jaw. It's nice to have one of these just to make it easier to hold a piece of metal in case you need it, or to be able to clamp something like a hammerhead to make it into almost like a tiny anvil or clamping surface. You need to have pliers of varying shapes and sizes. You can buy them individually. You can buy a kit. Again, most hardware stores, Menards, Harbor Freight, Home Depot, will have a kit you can buy with these mini pliers in them. But the primary ones you're going to want to have is a half round, a needle nose, a curved needle nose, wire snips, and just flat jaw. You'll find different purposes for each of them, but it's going to be kind of crucial for you to have all of these basic ones to do everything you need to do. If you're going to limit yourself on what you get, I would say you have to get the round nose, the curved needle nose, and the wire snips. Those I've used more than anything else, and I'd say those are probably going to be your most crucial. Rubber cement. When I first started in jewelry, I was attaching my designs that I've drawn out on paper to my metal using non-permanent double-sided tape, and that works. But I later found that just simple Elmer's rubber cement or any form of rubber cement works a lot better, because when you peel it off, there's almost no residue that you have to clean off, and you don't have to sit there and try to pick little pieces of tape off the metal. So it's always handy to have a jar of rubber cement to be able to do your design transfers. A tool that you don't necessarily need, but I have found makes things a lot easier, is this guy. This is a wire and tube cutter. It's got a little set screw on the back that when you loosen it, it allows you to change this bar here. And what you end up doing is you set your metal in here, either a wire or a tube. This flips over and it allows you to hold it like a little vise. And this groove you use to guide your saw blade so you can set the distance of what you're cutting, and it allows you to get a perfect identical length rivet every time that you go to make one. Nice flush edges, perfectly straight, perfectly the same length. It saves a lot of time and grief when you're trying to do a lot of rivets on a piece. So I have found this to be a kind of crucial tool that if you don't have in a kit you're carrying around with you, you should have one of these on hand somewhere. Another one that you don't necessarily need to have, but I have found helps, especially if you're just starting out, is a rouge cloth or polishing cloth. It is a soft cotton cloth for you to buff your material with that is 2 layers. The outside layer is just simple cotton. The inside layer is cotton that is embedded with powdered rouge, which is generally the finest layer of buffing compound you will use when making jewelry. And it allows you to give a nice sheen to whatever you're working on. It could be used very simply for if somebody has a ring or something that they want you to polish up for them, make it a little bit shinier. Or it could be used so if you are doing a piece out in public or at an event or something and you can't exactly bring a full buffing wheel machine with you, this will allow you to put a finish on your piece and be done right there without having to go anywhere else. But again, I just like having that. It is definitely not a needed. The last thing I have here that I'm going to show you right now is not a tool, but is something I have found very indispensable. And it is a book, The Complete Bladesmith by Tim McCreight. And this is kind of the end-all, be-all beginning jewelry manual. This exact copy I purchased when I was in high school and took my first jewelry class. It was used as the manual in my jewelry class there. It was used in the manual in all of my jewelry classes in my undergrad, and it was used as my manual in my master's program. So I'm thinking pretty much every major jewelry program you go to will use this as your manual. It is divided into chapters with page markers on the side. Goes everywhere from giving you alloy compositions of metals and their basic gravities to talking about any other types of metals you might use, instructions on how to engrave, do patinas, etchings, instructions on raising and chasing, and planishing, soldering, basic everything that you would want to cover in a basic jewelry course is in this book. If you were able to learn simply by reading, you could learn basically everything with this book. It has a little bit of it all. It is an invaluable asset that I still use as a reference when I need to figure out how to do something. So this is definitely something, if you're just getting started, pick this up and read it. It will help you a great deal. So there you have it. I know this was pretty quick. There's not a whole lot here, and I didn't go into real in-depth on how most of these are used, but these are what I consider the basic tools for any beginning jeweler or metalsmith. All of them will fit into a nice little toolbox. It'll be easier for you to take around with you, store anywhere, and using that clamp-on bench pin, you can work almost anywhere. Dining room table, your desk in your room, wherever you want to go. It's not too expensive. You can get starter kits on Amazon, well, maybe not Amazon, but you can buy starter kits at different places, Rio Grande Jewelry, places like that, between $200 and $300, and it will give you a nice starter kit that you don't have to piecemeal everything out on. I have down below in the description I have links to some version of all of these on Amazon. I've started a Amazon Associates program, so if you make purchases using my qualifying links, it will help me out a little bit to try and get some more content going on this channel. So if you want to get started in jewelry and you need to know what you're looking for, you can use some of those links to pick up some of the tools. In some of my other jewelry demo videos, I've talked about how to use some of these in detail. I'll cover more of them in future videos. If you have a suggestion for a type of jewelry technique you might want to see me try to cover, or any questions on any of this stuff, feel free to comment in the descriptions or in the comments. And hope to see what some of you guys make someday. Till next time.